The Gospel of Gold by G.S. Lewis. Chapter 20, Heart of Darkness. Tired. That was the only word that really described him right now. He could not tell, based upon the time of day, how long he must have spent recovering in that sacred ash. Spirit was right, it had not been long enough. He was too tired to care. He looked left and right, but saw no place where he could circumvent the water. After some short consideration, he simply waded in and across. It was not far, and at least it would wash the remaining ashes off his clothing. On the other side, Gold continued his walk, dully searching for indications of civilization and the national park. The thought came dimly to him that he would still be wanted by the Goldenrod police as an escaped fugitive. If he was found on the road by anyone, sopping wet and in proximity of his detention center, it would surely be reported. He was too tired to care. As time went on, his presence of mind returned in some degree. He noted that the light overhead was dimming, which meant that the day was nearing its end. It had still been night out when he'd fled his cell, so he must have spent at least a whole day unconscious, if not more. To spend as much time fainted as he had lately, what had this adventure done to his body? His hunger grew sharper, and he thought of the goldberries with longing and regret. Spirit had tried to help him in offering them. All she had ever done was help. But not every time, he remembered. Eventually, the night deepened enough for the street lamps to flicker on, and by their glow, Gold found his way back to the road. He still kept out of the direct light as best he could manage, and it was good that he did, for uniformed men with searchlights occasionally happened along, whistling tunelessly and only half-heartedly surveying the area with their beams. While Gold had waited for the first watchman to pass, he looked and saw Goldenrod radio tower glowing in the distance. It was to the south, which meant that he was moving in the northern direction toward Ecruteak. Good, he was putting in the distance. He was sure to make it home if he could be careful enough. He followed the road further, and in time reached the entrance gatehouse to National Park. I've been uncommonly lucky, he thought, drifting into the trees and giving the gate a wide berth. Not only has the night patrol left me alone, but all the wild Pokemon too. They can't all be asleep. Is something keeping them at bay? The grass in National Park was high, despite the generally domesticated feel of the place. Gold knew that bug-type Pokemon frequented this area, and that he must soon choose between the infested grass and the cleanly paved sidewalk. The latter was bathed in lamplight, and there were several park benches around, on which anyone might be resting, even at this hour. Still, he felt that he had pushed his luck far enough with wild Pokemon, and that any attacks now weren't worth the risk. Not at the halfway point to Ecruteak City. In a few strides, he'd reached the paved garden path. He brushed the grass from his legs, shoved his hands in his pockets, and sauntered along at what he hoped would pass for a casual night stroll to onlookers. After a few minutes of walking, Gold noticed that the lamp ahead of him was colored differently than the others. Until this point, they had pooled a standard yellow-white glow, but this one shone with a purple hue. It was not a curious enough thing in itself to stop Gold, yet he halted all the same, detecting something else. There was a chill presence in the lamp. It wasn't overbearing, at least not like Silver's suffocating aura, but it flashed a warning for caution to his sixth sense. What is going on here? Gengar, mean look! The voice came from behind him, and it was one that sparked a flash of recognition in Gold's mind. He turned around to look behind him in expectation. Morty? To his shock, rather than the gym leader he had known since childhood, Gold found himself face to face with his Pokemon. The Gengar, a dark lavender entity of horns, spikes, and teeth, glared at him from the night's shade. Its two crimson eyes rooted him to the spot, tapping into the primal fear that all living things feel when confronted with the supernatural. Under Morty's tutelage, Gengar was the epitome of what ghost-type Pokemon could do. Gold couldn't have moved, even if someone had swung a bat at his head. Morty said something else that Gold couldn't hear, and Gengar vanished at once from view, revealing the gym leader behind him. He was dressed just as Gold always remembered him, after the style of his type specialty. He wore a black sweater and a lavender-colored scarf, two comfort necessities for anyone who spent long periods of time in the cold presence of ghosts. His headband served a similar purpose, in addition to keeping the mane of blonde hair out of his face. Morty had his eyes concentrated on Gold's, and his expression was one of worry. His mouth moved, but Gold only dimly picked up the last few words. Morty was calling his name. "Hear me now? Was it too strong?" Gold staggered backwards and passed a hand over his eyes. His body was shaking with the after effects of Gengar's fear projection, and his heart was beating wildly. For all the time he had known Morty, the man had only ever been a tutor to him. This ghost-type leader side of him was utterly jarring. Morty approached and placed both hands on his shoulders, seeming determined to hold his eyes. "Look at me." "Gold?" Gold focused on his face, and his pulse subsided a little. Morty frowned at him thoughtfully. "So, it's true. You respond to Gold now." Gold blinked. "I guess I do, even after I told Spirit I was done." "Morty," he said breathily, still not quite over his shell shock. What are you doing here? I don't know whether or not I should be happy to see you." "That makes two of us," said Morty grimly. "We haven't got much time. Karen is coming." "Karen?" Gold looked at him, mind blank. "Karen who?" "The leader of the Elite Four. The most powerful woman in the Johto League. I thought I taught you this. She basically runs it now, and Morty cut off his explanation abruptly and took his hands away from Gold's shoulders. He turned and stood straighter, formally, almost like a soldier at attention. "I've got him, ma'am," he said stiffly. "He came, just as you predicted." "That will do, Morty." Gold turned once more at the new voice. A woman approached out of the darkness, looking, if he had to guess, in her mid to late 20s. It was hard to tell, for she had long, gray hair that came down in waves to her waist. She wore a skimpy black dress, as if she were going out for a night of entertainment. Gold heard the quiet clopping of her high-heeled shoes as she came near him. The newcomer stopped only when she was a hand's breadth away, well within Gold's personal space. "I am Karen of the Elite Four." Karen, Gold thought, suppressing an urge to shiver. Whether it was from her presence or an after effect of Gengar's glare, he could not be sure. She leaned down to look at him with cold eyes, and the beginnings of a condescending smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You're Gold? How amusing." "Sorry?" said Gold, finding his words without tone. "What's amusing?" "The show you've been putting on, at least from what I've heard." Karen brushed an arm casually through her hair. "After that incident in Azalea Town, some people online have taken to calling you Mr. Slowpoke. Others dub you Chansey Boy, though that one isn't as popular. Gold is the name that seems to have stuck." Her head tilted upward ever so slightly. "Personally, I don't see it. There's nothing gold about you. I'd ask you to pick a better name, but soon enough, it won't matter." She put a hand on her hip, her expression almost bored. "My point is, you've gotten popular almost overnight. If a lot of people are interested in what you do, they'll also want to hear what you say." Karen gave him a look of repugnance, her nostrils flaring angrily. "Frankly, I don't like what you've been saying. Here I am, trying to improve the practice of Pokemon training, and here you come, a nobody out of nowhere, to hinder the progress." Gold's trembling ceased. Now that he looked at Karen again, he saw the spearhead of the aggression that Faulkner, Bugsy, and Whitney had displayed. All of it, and more, was this woman's doing. At long last, he was face to face with the League itself, personified in a black dress.